put the albatross or responsibility of the atrocities of someone like a Ghazni, Ghori, Timur, Tipu, Aurangzeb on communities today. I think that is absolutely unwarranted. It is terrible if someone does that. But the converse is also true, where communities of today should not valorize and hyphenate themselves with these barbarians.
What we're going to have a conversation about now is the entire instrument of writing history. It shapes our understanding of our present, it shapes our understanding of our past, and so it really, in a way, sculpts modern society. The lens through which we look at history completely changes the narrative around it. And today, we're going to be looking at one of the most contentious figures in India's history, Tipu Sultan. Depending on the perspective through which one looks at him, he's either a bigot, a progressive technologist, a nationalist fighter, an anti-colonial hero, or somebody who's also a tyrant, a communalist, and an absolute oppressor. So which of these is true? Tipu Sultan's story and the construct of Tipu Sultan plays into our lives every time that there is elections. And in a way, he's a symbol of the kind of fractured debates that are part of modern India. So to re-look at the history and narrative of Tipu Sultan, Vikram Sampath, again, a historian who's been bucking a lot of certitudes around the way history has been told in India, to great effect, sometimes controversial, greatly celebrated, but somebody who's been willing to put himself out there to pick up figures that have perhaps not been spotlighted over the last 75 years of modern Indian, since India became independent, and to revisit those stories and bring them into public debate and public consciousness. People across, particularly with Tipu Sultan, people across the political divides have hailed the meticulousness of his research and the fact that he has presented that kaleidoscope and possibly, as much as possible for any of us to be neutral, to leave a kind of neutral canvas where we can look at the facts and make our own judgments about somebody, as I said, who's still a live wire in our public life. As I laughed earlier, it's a 950-page book, so you can understand how much of scholarship has gone into it. It has and will trigger debates, and that is what makes it very important. The intention was to really open it up, and one of the things that he said in the foreword is that it is dangerous when we don't tell history with truth. So whether it is with good intent or bad intent, when history is skewed and some facts are put under the carpet, they will come up in a kind of Frankensteinian way to leap up at us in some way or the other. So it's better to have it out there, and so to discuss the act of history writing, to discuss Tipu and his father, Hyder Ali, the 40 years that actually really impacted this region from Mysore to Madras to the entire Deccan. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Vikram Sampath on stage. Vikram, thank you so much. The first edition that we did in Chennai, you were supposed to come for your Savarkar book, and you couldn't join us. So it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So Vikram, as I said, the act of history writing has become so contentious that I do want to come to that question about, what is the lens through which you write history? What is the vision driving some of the big projects that you're taking up? But I want to do that at the end of the conversation, when we first looked at the two characters that are your protagonists, So as I said, particularly with Tipu and also Hyder, they're looked at either as bigots or as brave, as courageous. William Dalrymple, who will be joining us later, said that, in fact, they're products of colonial villain making because they fought off the British painted them in bad light. So I want to, before we unravel your 900 pages, give me a kind of absolute distillate of, if left to yourself, how would you describe Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan?
Thank you, Shoma. It's such a pleasure to be here in Chennai, of all places. It's also partly my paternal home. My father comes from this part of the country, so it's such a pleasure to be here. And to talk about this person whose influence in what was Madras then was so immense. It's very, very difficult to box someone like Tipu Sultan into straight jackets of black and white. I think when it comes to characters like him, there are more than 50 shades of gray. And one needs to look at these characters also as product of their times and circumstances. So an 18th century ruler of Mysore who still, as you mentioned in your introduction, intrudes contemporary political discourse. I come from Karnataka, where in every election, it is a ping-pong ball between the Congress and the BJP, and both going to the absurd levels of trying to weaponize history, weaponize characters like this, and try to appropriate either a for or an against position. I think that is where the burden or a responsibility of a historian comes to put the facts on the table. The word itihasa comes from Sanskrit, which actually translates to it thus happened. Either ippadi aayithu. So that's all that is that one needs to know about itihasa. But then when you extrapolate contemporary politics with that history, I think then the history becomes a casualty, and he is certainly one such person. I would certainly like to add to what you asked as to why at all did I get interested in this man. I must say, in a very perverse and a very serendipitous way, I owe my entire literary career and historiography to Tipu Sultan. I was probably 12 or 13 years old when, I'm sure some of you in the audience would know, there was a very famous serial on Doordarshan, the only channel we all saw, called The Sword of Tipu Sultan by Sanjay Khan. And in that, I think to show Tipu and his father in a very good light, the Vadiyar Maharajas of Mysore, from whom they had usurped this throne, they were shown in a very, very, bad manner. If you remember, the Maharaja was shown like this obese retard who was dancing with the court dancer. The Maharani was one of those typical, vamps from an Ekta Kapoor serial, constantly, conniving, conspiring, and wanting Tipu out. And if you remember, there was also a fire that broke out in the studio, and Sanjay Khan's face had got burnt. And in the local Kannada media, there was a lot of talk about the fact that this is the Vadiyar's curse, and that is why, this happened to Sanjay Khan. As a 12, 13-year-old boy, that's how my entire interest to know, the entire joy of just discovery, the intellectual thrill that you get of research, led me to this alley to find out initially the truth about just that one king and queen who were misrepresented. Later, slowly, expanding to the entire dynasty. 600 years is what the Vadiyars ruled. But so Delhi-centric is our history that particularly where we all come from here, the South, rarely features in the larger history of Bharat. So that is how, quite by serendipity, after 10 years of research on that subject, my first book came out, Splendors of Royal Mysore. Now, during that time, I was giving a couple of talks. I was just 26 or 27 then, didn't know the landmines and the sharks that exist in this, murky world. And one such, lecture I was giving on the interregnum period, this 40-year interval period where Hyder and Tipu took, to usurp the throne. I was reading out letters which Tipu had written to his commanders in Calicut, saying, go and convert 4 lakh infidels and kafirs and break this, break that. While I was doing that, a civilized audience like this, suddenly one section of it broke out in protests. Paper rockets were thrown at the stage, and the organizers, luckily it was not you, aborted the speech, and I was ushered away somewhere else. My father was sitting in the first row, and someone came and thrust a pamphlet in his hand saying, you have an only son, and if you want him to live long, ask him to mind what he says and writes. And quite coincidentally, just 2 weeks later, I'd written some article in the newspaper, and my effigy was burnt for that on Tipu Sultan in the heart of Bangalore, in MG Road. And my mother, who didn't keep good health, she extracted a promise from me that in future I will never ever talk about Tipu Sultan in public. Now, I kept the promise to her till she was alive. I unfortunately lost her in 2018. Then I thought, once the person you made the promise to is not there, then the promise is also, invalid. So that's where I broke the promise and wrote this book, which was germinating in my head for so long.
Right.
I think it was dil ki bhadaas nikalna tha. For 15 years of so much of suppressed emotions, that's how this book came out.
Right. So Vikram, as I said, I'm going to take this up at the end of it when we've really shared all the research with the audience. I want to zero into, as I said, 3 or 4 lenses through which to look at Tipu and Hyder. One is the lens of bravery and the fact that they took on the might of the British. Right here, the first Anglo-Mysore War, they brought the British government to its knees. And in Madras, in fact, they signed the most humiliating treaty with the British, which shook the stock markets of the East India Company. So first, let's look at the father and son through that. Talk to us about what was the innovation, through the bravery lens. Just do a laundry list of that.
Yeah. So just to understand that, so Hyder was someone who literally rags to riches kind of a story. He was born in 1721 to a chieftain who was with the Nawab of Sira, and the father dies when this boy was just 4 years old. And he owed some money to some debtors, and to get that money, the debtor comes and plunders the house, and these 2 boys, Hyder, who's 4 years old, and his elder brother, Shehbaz, who's 8 years old, they are also, attacked. They're put in a kettle drum, a nagada, and beaten on. And in that situation, his mother, Majida Begum, she runs away to Srirangapatna, pleads with the Maharaja of Mysore to take mercy on her fatherless sons. And the Maharaja takes, a lot of pity on them. He pays off the debtors. And he also makes a promise that once they come of age, we will take them into the Mysorean army. And he keeps up that promise. And Hyder comes into the political firmament of India, of South India, particularly when the Carnatic wars were raging here, the Arcot Nawab, succession wars in Hyderabad. In that, he comes in 1749. And mind you, in just 12 years, 1749 to 1761, there is a series of events that happen. Machiavellian that he is, a big strategist. He would put all our politicians today to shame with the kind of running with the hare and hunting with the hounds that he did, and engineered a situation where he overthrows the throne of his own benefactor, and he takes over as the Sarvadhikari, or the supreme dictator. But of course, in retrospect, that was a great thing for Mysore, which had got emasculated by then. The army was not really fighting fit. So both father and son, the credit where it is due is that they made Mysore, the Mysorean army, as you said, a really fighting fit army which threatened the British. The Madras, the very gates of Fort St. George was where they attacked in the First Anglo-Mysore War. And the British could have been exterminated from India at that point. Even the Second Anglo-Mysore War, if you speak of it, there is a battle of Polilur, which happened close to where we are sitting here, where even someone like Sir Hector Munro, who was the hero of the battles of Plassey and Buxar, he throws away all his guns and ammunitions in a tank in Kanchipuram and runs to Madras to save his life. So that way, there were 4 wars that the father and son waged against the British. It took the British 30 years to conquer the province of Mysore, the last, perhaps, bastion of resistance. Maybe if you consider the Sikhs later as one more bastion, because the Marathas had already gotten weakened by then. So in 30 years, 4 wars, 2 of which the father, spearheaded. Under his father's leadership, Tipu actually proved to be a great warrior. And some of these Battle of Polilur and other things, that was something he also participated. But the 3rd and the 4th Anglo-Mysore War, which he led independently, he actually didn't win any war against the British. And that's the dichotomy that we call him this, while he showed resistance, the result was not in his favor in both the wars. In the 3rd war, he actually loses half his kingdom. He has to give 3.5 crores as war indemnity at a time when the state budget was 2 crores.
And hostages his sons.
Sons, both his sons. And after that, it was a steady downfall. And you had the last Anglo-Mysore War, where he's literally holed up inside his fort in Srirangapatna, and he's killed in battle on 4th of May, 1799. So that's been the arch. These 40 years, these interregnum years, while it's just 40 years, I think they shaped and they became the unmaking of India. Because after that, steadily, India's capitulation to British colonialism was, I think, a script that was unraveling, chapter by chapter, and we see it happening.
So I'll just pick up on that phrase. One, just to add on quickly, but yes, they modernized that warfare. He took help of the French, artillery to create the kind of cavalry, to use the same technology, the ammunition of the British back at them. So he had that, both Hyder Ali and he had that foresight to actually modernize the armies. But you just used a phrase, that they shaped the unmaking of India, Vikram. So what did you mean by that? And I'm going to come to, as I said, the lens of bigotry and communalism later, but just sticking with their martial identity. In the book, there are times when you've said, say, Siddharamaya, for instance, wanted to create a float of Tipu Sultan as a celebration of Tipu. On the other hand, the BJP was trying to polarize it by saying that, their killers were actually the Gaudas rather than that they had been killed in battle. So that tension between celebration and denunciation or polarization, you've said that Hitler would never be celebrated, and so these two should really never be celebrated because they were writing to Napoleon, they were writing to the Caliph, they were writing to Afghanistan. He was inviting all of them to, invade India and take on the British. He took the French on. But at the same time, when you look at the wars of that time, the Marathas, the Nizam, him, and the British were the key protagonists. And it was a constantly unstable alliances. They were always coming together, coming apart. Was that not the nature of the time? Why do you reserve particular judgment for them to be doing this?
I think you've covered a lot of aspects. I don't know where to pick
so
the thread
core,
up from.
core idea is, why do you penalize Tipu for reaching out to unlikely alliances when the Marathas were doing that? Or
No, I'm not penalizing anybody. I think a historian's work is not to sit in judgment of characters of the past or judge them by yardsticks and standards of today. I think the problem becomes when you call a person like this a freedom fighter who fought for the liberation of India. When you're taking French support to actually defeat the British, and the French, as seen in the Carnatic Wars, Dupleix was just here across in Pondicherry, the French had no less imperialist ambitions. So had Tipu by a stroke of destiny won, maybe we in Karnataka would be speaking French, or we would have this conversation today in French instead of English that we are having. We would have been a French colony. And you see, there he was playing to the rivalry between the British and the French, with the rest of the Ummah, the larger Muslim brotherhood that he was addressing, whether it was the Caliph from whom he sought sanction to be called a legitimate Badshah of Mysore. Because he knew he was a usurper. His father had usurped the throne. That was not a hereditary passover to the son. So you needed legitimacy. He writes so many letters to the Mughal emperor. The Mughal himself is, under the Marathas then. Yeah. He's totally powerless to give anything. So he writes to the Caliph saying, I am the true ruler of the faith, and I have done all these things. You wear those as medals that I have killed so many people, I have killed, burnt so many churches and temples, so make me the undisputed Badshah. And these letters also, whether it is to Napoleon or to Ahmad Shah Durrani, the Afghanistan ruler, very clearly 2 years before his death, he writes, come and invade India. And it's a very clear prescription and plan saying, let the war happen for 2 years. The first year, you come and let us together liberate the whole of northern India from the Kafirs. The predication is on the faith. So be it, the Marathas, the Rajputs, the Jats. And the second year, we'll liberate the whole of South India from the Kafirs. Then let us both meet at the center of this subcontinent and divide this whole country amongst us and make it an Islamic caliphate. This is problematic today to actually posit, is everybody who fought the British a freedom fighter, to put that definition? No doubt he was brave. As I said, no doubt the father and son actually made Mysore's army a fighting fit. The rockets that they developed, which was already there in a large part of the Deccan, but they changed the technology. Instead of the wooden and paper casing, they made it out of iron. And so the thrust of the rockets, the distance it could go, it spelled disaster, especially for the British. No doubt all of that. But is just being anti-British a criteria to call someone a freedom fighter? We do that post facto, knowing now that the British is the bad guy and anyone who fought against them is the good guy. But like you said, they were all players. So he was not fighting for the concept of freeing India. I mean, he was fighting to save his own life, his own honor, his family, his kingdom. Just like all the other players were cohabiting with the British or the French. So I think just as you can't call the Nizam, who allied with the British or the French, as a freedom fighter just because he did that, similarly, I don't think, so that is where I have my reservations. I don't penalize Tipu because that was the times that he lived in.
Right. No, I think that's a fair answer. For me, it was fascinating. Like I said, you really brought out the kaleidoscope of it. And I agree, this you start the book by saying that, soon after, there was G. Parthasarthi, there was a kind of education commission, and there was a discussion that now when we write our history, we must remove the thorns that will create, sort of hurt the psyche of our modern independent nation. So there was a kind of brushing over uncomfortable aspects of, say, some of these Muslim rulers, And for me personally, I think it's absolutely important that we bring this out for public conversation, for first of all, knowledge and discovery, and not link it to modern day Muslims, which is what all political establishments do.
I've all the time, Shoma, in every talk, even in my book I've written, it is to put the albatross or responsibility of the atrocities of someone like a Ghazni, Ghori, Timur, Tipu, Aurangzeb on communities today. I think that is absolutely unwarranted. It is terrible if someone does that. But the converse is also true, where communities of today should not valorize and hyphenate themselves with these barbarians. If people are politicians too, are going to the mazar of Aurangzeb, and in television discussions, he's called "Wo hamare wali the," and so on, then that creates a problem. And we somehow labor under the false misapprehension that talking about these terrible truths will somehow upset social harmony and national unity today. Thereby, we ourselves in this assumption are hyphenating them. If you talk about Aurangzeb, a community today, why should it get offended? We openly talk about the atrocities that the British committed. We talk about Churchill, the Bengal famine. That time we are not thinking that the Christians of India are going to get offended. We are openly talking about that. So, but only here, why is there an airbrushing of history that happens? And it's not some fictional thing that, what Dr. Bhairappa mentioned. Also, that the edifice of national unity cannot rest on the shaky foundations of whitewashed history. Because I think truth has a very uncomfortable way of coming out. And truth is the best disinfectant. So we have not made peace with the past. We have tried to push it all under a carpet, all the muck under the carpet, and put some deodorant. And we think it's going to be pleasant. But sometime it will show up. We are seeing what is happening in Sambhal, in so many places where historical wounds, since they have not been addressed properly, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission where we heal our past, say thus far and no further, and move forward. We shouldn't, and as a historian I'm saying this, that we shouldn't live in the past. Let some of us live in the past, do all the research and the archival work, and show these as stories. That shouldn't determine today's society or politics, or certainly not of India's future, especially at a time when we are at the cusp of greatness.
What you said is really important, and that drawing of a line is really important, because right now, in fact, there's also discussion about, which may be historically true, not archaeologically true. The point is about drawing a line in the sand. That I just saw before coming here, that there's a talk now that there's a Shiva temple under the Ajmer Sharif, So going by the history of things, could well be true, not true, but how much of this can one undo? But I think definitely looking it in the eye. But again, looking at it in the eye with a kind of 360-degree vision on something, Vikram. So again, just sticking with the military aspect of it. When you said that, yes, he was reaching out to these people, what I found fascinating in your book was that there's a kind of arc to their characters, And Hyder Ali is... he's very devoted to the Shringeri, the mutt, as well as to the Ramaswamy temple, the Ranganathan temple. He's giving alms to the Brahmins. At one point, he particularly says that when there's a procession, he particularly says that this is not a Islamic state, etc. So he is not communal as Tipu becomes later, and we'll come to that. But at the same time, when you're saying that Tipu was writing to these people saying, create a caliphate, it was post the Third Anglo-Mysore War, when he'd been let down, he'd reached out to the Marathas, he'd reached out to others, and they did not come to his aid. So there's a kind of absolute swing away. Same way Subhash Chandra Bose reached out to the Japanese, Or the Marathas reached out to Aurangzeb when they were fighting the Bijapur kingdom, you know. So in fact, Shivaji reached out to Aurangzeb to come into Bijapur. So reading all these things, it's fascinating again to see what is the lens through which we should look at this.
I repeat what I said, that you have to look at these characters of the past by yardsticks that they set of that time. Were others doing, at that time, doing something similar? You may be let down by your contemporaries. You go into also the reasons why you were let down. There were lots of strategic faults that he committed. I would actually rate his father is a very low-profile, uncelebrated, ruler. He would probably rank much higher in my estimate, just for the cold, calculated manner in which he captured power. And that is, for that reason, faith and matters of the faith didn't matter to him. As long as, he got what he wanted, he allowed people to do what they wished. But I think when this element of bigotry comes into an individual, and repeatedly he got sane advice from his father, from his mother too, who had a lot of control over him. Repeatedly, even in the open court, she comes out and tells him, there's one such court gathering where one of the most trusted ministers, Purnaya, who was a confidant of Hyder also, he's a Madhva Brahmin, and someone who was trusted even to Tipu. In the open court, he tells him that you're so intelligent, so why don't you convert and become one of us? And he's a very artful badger, so he says, "Haan, ji huzur," and then quickly makes an exit. And his mother, who's sitting in the zanana behind the parda, she comes out and tells him that, look, if you do this, your father also never did this, if you do this, then your end is near, because you're going to lose the confidence of everybody. And that's exactly what happened. You have to go and reach out to the Shah of Persia and Turkey because you lost the confidence of everyone around you. Not only Hindus, but the Muslims too. One of the main architects of the fall of Srirangapatna was this man called Mir Sadiq, who was his prime minister. And Mir Nadim, who was a Kiledar, he closes all the escape routes of the fort so that he can't escape anywhere. He tries to escape on the 4th of May, but he doesn't have a place. So it's not a Hindu-Muslim binary here. I think it's, what I see it as is as a case study of leadership. What propelled Hyder from that, literally, as I said, rags to riches. You really worked hard to establish your empire, and that is handed on a platter to the son, who, thanks to his hubris, his arrogance, megalomania, and surrounded by sycophants who didn't give good counsel, almost as a very, very bloated self-image where you think I can do no wrong. There were also occasions mentioned where he is blasphemous enough to assume himself to be as great and sometimes even greater than Prophet Muhammad. So when you have such kind of psychopathy in you, then your end is near. So I think as a human being's arch too, forget all the politics, all the military stuff, I think it's a case study of what a leader should not do to ensure that even if you get something on a platter from your father, you can squander it off in just 17 years.
Yeah. There are going to be a lot of legacy managers who are going to take that note. But I just want to come back again to there's some kind of pivotal incidents in both their lives which really explain them. Hyder, as you said, as a child was inside that kettle drum with them beating on that kettle drum, and it kind of scarred him. And he was also constantly looking for legitimacy, to be called Bahadur, to be, for him to be acknowledged. But Tipu, and he was illiterate. But I'd love to share that with the audience. Actually, Hyder Ali was illiterate, but he knew 4 languages. He knew Tamil, he knew Telugu, Kannada, Marathi, didn't know Persian, and was fantastic at maths, had insane memory, but he was very, very motivated to get Tipu Sultan in education. And do share with the audience when he found out what Tipu Sultan's education had amounted to.
Yeah, so I think the only literary achievement of this man, Hyder, all his life, was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name, which was H. Beyond that, he didn't have any, education. And that's also, education doesn't equal to wisdom. Right. Someone who actually was illiterate could actually build an empire. And so he was very keen that his sons, both Tipu and the younger one, Karim, they got the best of education, but he didn't know what they were studying because he was himself unread. So he put some person, a Maulvi or someone, in charge of their education. And 2-3 years later, he does a mock examination. Batao, let us see what all you have learned. And he's aghast by what he hears, and he loses his temper. He throws the Maulvi away, and he says, what kind of seeds of bigotry have you sown in my son? If he'll become a good mullah, if he becomes, does this, he will not become a good ruler. And again and again, there are several instances I quote where to his confidants he says, what all I have struggled and built in my life, this son of mine, due to his lack of strategic sense, is going to lose it all away. And it turned out to be perversely true. So I think that also says a lot. And the best part of Tipu, Shoma, is that he was so well read. He wrote copiously. So there is no scope for ambiguity in what he said. He was, I think, a control freak. Even when he was sending these embassies to different countries, he was guiding every little detail. You should go here, you should do this, you should not open the box of presents in front of this one. Everything was micromanaged. So there is a vast plethora of written content of this man in Persian and his own dream registers. So every night he was a very vivid dreamer. And it is said that in the morning he would spend about 2 hours in his toilet recollecting all that he saw the previous night and assiduously writing it down. And I had the pleasure of actually looking at the original dream register in the India Office Library in British Library in London. And those dreams also, in fact, I got those dreams psychoanalyzed from a psychiatrist because the dreams are the index of the mind, the subconscious mind, and each one is violent. It is full of hatred. I think he was so consumed by his own hatred, you auto-combust almost, every day. I saw that picture of that tiger toy that he had in his room. There was this huge contraption where there is a wooden contraption of a tiger feasting on a fallen British soldier. And it had a crank which you move, and then the whole contraption rotates. And there are these growls of the tiger and the howls and shrieks of the British soldier. And it is said every day he used to listen to that to inspire himself to fight the British. And the British found that in his palace after his death, and they were so enamored by it, they shipped it all the way to London. And quite unwittingly, they placed it in a library. And it is said, but suddenly, in the middle of the day, when the scholars were deep in research, this contraption would automatically start, operating by itself, and howls and shrieks. And so the librarian's quote I have reproduced, which said this terrible thing, it finally went into disrepair, and we're so glad nobody repaired it. They immediately shipped it off to the Victoria Albert Museum, where it still lies. And somewhere that was very symbolic. Just as they had silenced the toy's owner, I think the British silenced the toy too. And it just sits there as a mute spectator to the kind of historical, upheavals that this subcontinent saw then.
So, I want to shift quickly to some of the true atrocities that he committed, which are shocking to read. And again, it's important that it sees the light of day, is acknowledged and set aside as immaterial to modern India. But so give us a laundry list. Again, I would pick the 3 big anecdotes: what he did to the Christians of Mangalore, what he did to the Palghat, and then what he did to the Mandya Brahmins.
Yeah.
If you pick those 3, that'll be
Sure.
indicated.
So before I get to that, I mean, people could argue, and rightly so, that kingship and violence are intrinsically linked. And we are talking of a pre-modern era of 18th century when, most of them were violent. Hyder was also violent when it came to invasions outside, though, as I said, he was tolerant within the kingdom, but outside, when he attacked particularly Malabar, the northern Kerala districts of Malappuram, Calicut, Chirakkal, all these little principalities, or this part of the country in the Carnatic, there was lots of violence. In Coorg, for instance, he orders for 5 rupees for every Coorgi head that is brought, and ghoulishly sitting and counting heads and distributing money. And after 600 heads come, Coorgis are very fair and tall and very good looking. One pretty young boy's face comes and he takes pity at it, saying, "Oh, such a pretty boy, let's stop the beheading." If that boy's head was not pretty, then many more would have been beheaded in the process. So that cruelty of kingship is accepted, but we must understand that some are more cruel than the rest of them. And when it comes specifically with the identity of an individual, which is what a genocide, as per the United Nations, prevention and protection against crime of genocide in 1948, the definition is, even if you have the intent to actually target people, based on their race, their color, their religion, whatever. So that is genocide. And in that, of course, Tipu went very, very far. And as I said, he wrote copiously. So there is no, this thing for ambiguity reason, because he himself is gloating over this. He's writing these letters, he's gloating over it, he's recording it and sending it to all those badshahs abroad. So the 3 or 4 instances which face the maximum brunt, one is, of course, the Mandyam Iyengars in Mysore, within the Mysore kingdom. 2 people in that community actually try to help the deposed Wadiyar family to regain the throne. The Maharani is put in house arrest, Lakshmi Ammanni, and these 2 people called the Mysore Pradhans, who belong to the Iyengar community, they go and bring emissaries to Madras, to the British governor. Now he tries to catch them, but he's unable to. So the brunt of that is borne by 700 men, women, and children of the Mandyam Iyengar community, where on the festival of Diwali, Naraka Chaturdashi, one day before Diwali, 700 of them are brought to a temple, Lakshmi Narasimha temple in Srirangapatna, almost like what General Dyer did, a false alarm. They're all given a feast. And while they're in the middle of this feast, the temple doors are closed and elephants are left in, and all of them are trampled to death. And those who try to escape are killed. Exactly what happened at Jallianwala Bagh. So, and you say this happened some other time. I would say the intergenerational memory and trauma is such that even to this day, after 250 years, members of the Mandyam Iyengar community do not celebrate Diwali on the day that all of us in India celebrate. They observe that as a day of Shraddh and mourning, and I think 1 week later is when they commemorate Diwali. So that memory is not something fossilized in the past. It is very, the hurt, the wound of that is very much there in successive generations. So that was one. The other was with the Kodavas in Coorg, where, as I said, both Hyder and Tipu wanted control over Coorg, and untold miseries, meted on all of them. In fact, 12th of December every year, the Kodava National Council commemorates that as the day of a martyr's day, because on that day in 1785, almost something like 40,000 people, they were invited to this place called Devati Param. And again, this false alarm. Come for negotiations, they come believing him, then they come unarmed, and then when they are unarmed, they're all killed. And there in his letters to his commander, Zainul Abidin Shustri, he says something very horrifying. He says, after you've caught all of them, convert not only the captors who are alive, convert even the dead. Even the dead bodies have to be circumcised and converted to Islam. And that is documented. Now you have to take the person when it's the first person talking. And he writes back saying, as per your orders, so many dead bodies have been converted. Then you have the Mangalore Christians. Again, you see on Ash Wednesday, which is an important event in the Christian calendar, almost something like 60,000 to 80,000 Kannada Christians from Mangalore dragged all the way, tied to elephants, from Mangalore to Srirangapatna, 300 kilometers, pregnant women being asked to march, most of them delivering babies on the way. And after they came to Srirangapatna, if they didn't convert, their noses and lips being cut off, and they paraded on donkeys. Almost 27 churches in Mangalore, which were destroyed. All of this, why? Because some of the bishops who were Portuguese, during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, they helped the British. They collaborated with the British. And when Tipu's attack was imminent, they all took a ship and ran away to Goa. But the brunt of all of that fell on the poor Mangalore Christians, who were probably laborers and farmers. They had nothing to do with the politics. Just like those 700 men, women, children had nothing to do with his politics. But to teach the community a lesson, so as I said, targeted killing based on someone's identity. If you want to catch those people who collaborated with your enemy, that is fine. But you're targeting the entire community. Similarly, the Nayars in Malabar. I mean, the warrior class that they are, I mean, the kind of atrocities in Calicut, in various parts where 4 lakh people, and that's also documented by him, that so many were converted. And the long list, I actually write of the long list of temples that he destroyed in Kerala, whose living examples and archaeological proof is there even now. There is one temple where his army or someone goes and tries to break the Shivlinga. The Shivlinga doesn't break. So, and that is still there. It has the marks of the sword on it. they come out and they see the Nandi there, and so the Nandi bears the brunt of the anger, and so its head is cut off, and the Nandi is like that only even today. I mean,
So-
headless.
So, Vikram, again, if we were to, so it's important, as I said, that this gets an airing, it's looked at in the eye, and like you said, Tipu should just stop being a ball of modern, ricocheting between celebration or vilification.
So this is the point, Shoma, that, when this Tipu Jayanti business was started by the Congress government, I mean, BJP doing what it does, it can do. But civil communities went up in protest. Now, the Christians of Mangalore have nothing, I'm sure, to do with the BJP. But you had the Archbishop of Mangalore, the Archdiocese, several Christian communities coming out in protest, saying, how can you do this to our wounds, what our ancestors faced? 27 churches are still standing, as live witnesses of what was done. Don't our emotions matter? So the Christians there, some of the Malayalis also, and the Mandya Mayangars, the Kodavas even now.
Right.
So much so that the Kodavas have started asking for a separate state. They said, we don't want to associate with Karnataka itself because this is something totally, this is not the only reason, but this is certainly one of the reasons where they say we have culturally nothing in common with the rest of Karnataka. And this is what has happened to our ancestors, and still the political establishment of that state valorizes such a person. Individuals wanting, you form a Tipu fan club, the same kind who came and gave that pamphlet to my father and threatened me and so on, that is still fine. Let them commemorate anybody's birthday, death day, whatever. But an elected government in a democratic country on taxpayers' money to actually commemorate a person like this whose crimes and the wounds of which are still alive, I mean, that's why I said you can't have a Hitler Jayanti in Israel or Germany. It's almost the same.
So, Vikram, again, in the interests of that complexity, two questions I wanted to put to you here, and we're going to run out of time soon, is that at the same time, so Hyder, as we said, was actually not someone who was communal, and he used to support thousands of temples. He gave money to Brahmins. He was constantly consulting astrologers. Some of his closest advisors were Brahmins, and at one point he in fact said that a monk would at least lives in peace rather than me being a badshah, always seeing assassins and conspirators, So he was...
Team has done good research.
Yes. Now we have Tipu Sultan, who while doing all of this, and like you said, it's all documented, at the same time, was also reaching, he, particularly for Adi Shankaracharya's mutt, he had great sanctity. He called it Sarvamanya, that he'll not give taxes there. He was consulting Hindu astrologers. He was giving Brahmins alms. He was protecting a lot of temples as well, while he was also doing this. So can you help us understand that? One question. And the second is, when you were saying there's this kind of absolute depredation and, oppressive tyranny, for me, what was a completely new knowledge from your book was that when the Marathas had attacked, they actually destroyed Mysore, and they also destroyed Adi Shankaracharya's mutt, and later they are seeking apologies, and they destroyed that region quite a bit. So, like you were saying, was this just the medieval sort of? In fact, Tipu Sultan and his father have a completely bizarre agreement where Tipu says, you can share that with the audience, Is that just indicative, like you said, that violence was just the currency? And help us understand both these two things.
As I said, violence is intrinsic with kingship of the medieval times. But as I said, some are more violent and violent for a particular reason, with a specific targeting based on identity. And the son and father and son never got along on these issues. In fact, Hyder had banned the slaughter of cows and oxen and all that in Mysore because it was, and this is recorded in the Dutch accounts. But this guy, as a young boy, Tipu would go and particularly hunt down cows and oxen. And so once or twice he's caught for that, and his father gives him, punishment, solitary confinement for 6 days. Nobody is supposed to talk to him. In fact, the same psychiatrist whom I spoke to said those who have very strict fathers, I think, a lot of dictators, if you look at them, I think it's the father wounds speaking. You become so, when you have corporal punishments for everything, then you don't brook any kind of dissent, any kind of mistake from another person. You ensure that you
in
give
fact,
it
he
back.
was flogged in the middle of the war by his father in an open court. Yeah.
As a adult in 1770, he was probably 21 years old. Right in the middle of the war, he does something intemperate, and this man is so incensed. The father, he snatches a cane and whacks him hard in front of everybody. And Tipu throws a tantrum. He throws off his sword and dashes his turban to the ground and says, "To hell with you and your war. I'm not going to participate in it." And so Hyder had actually adopted several other boys, Sheikh Ayaz, Muhammad Ali, saying they are better than me, than this fellow who will squander my kingdom away. And so when Tipu comes to power, the first thing he does is to eliminate all of them.
Yeah.
Now,
Just
so
quickly,
very, very
quickly
insecure.
talk about the
Now
agreement before we come to the Marathas and the agreement between
Yeah,
father and son.
So after this flogging and caning and all that, and he throws the tantrum. So again, the British find this agreement which is found in Tipu's palace room. There are 8 articles written in Tipu's hand again, saying, if I lie, then I can be flogged. If I steal some items, then I can be strangulated. If I actually, do idle talk, then I can get, 100 whiplashes. If I conspire against the Sarkar, then I can be hanged. And I'm writing all this, pure hosho havas mein, I'm writing this in my own senses, and signs it. So obviously from petty crimes to treason, there were so many things that the father thought the son was capable of doing. So the father-son dynamic, and that's why the psychology of the person is so much more nicer to see as to how that actually influences their real life, their kingship model and all of that. Now this Shringeri episode, I completely agree. A lot of Maratha raids that were done on Mysore for collecting Chauth and Sardeshmukhi, they were literally like looters who were coming and taking this. A lot of places, villages were destroyed and all that. Now this particular Shringeri episode, there's lots of nuance that is needed there, and I'll just take a couple of minutes there. So 1791, in the Third Anglo-Mysore War, when Parshuram Bhau's army invades Mysore, they go to Shringeri. And it is not the Marathas who actually destroy the temple. It is actually the Pindaris and the Lamans. The Pindaris were the irregulars in the army. Now, Pindari, the word itself comes from someone who consumes a lot of grass, implying that they smoked up a lot. They were into intoxication and drugs. So they were the irregulars who would go loot a lot of things. And they survived on war booty. Now, these people were the ones who go and plunder the temple. Even the Sharada Vigraha is vandalized, and that was the primal seat of Adi Shankara among the 4 major mutts that he established. But this happened. But what was the outcome in Pune? So immediately, shockwaves go back to Pune. The Peshwa writes so many letters to the Shankaracharya. The Shankaracharya sat on a fast unto death in protest. And there are these letters which say, if he dies, then that is the end of our Peshwa empire. So at any cost, stop him from doing this. I will give you double the amount of money, almost 60 lakhs or something was plundered. I'll give double the amount. You please stop your fast. Those are the letters which I managed to gather from the Peshwa Daftar in Pune. Now at that time, this man who already had a good equation with the Shankaracharya says, don't accept money from the Peshwa. I will give you money. You take this. So you can also look at it as a very, very smart realpolitik move where before your opponent comes to get, the benefit, you actually, save the situation for yourself. And 1 year later, the Shankaracharya actually goes to Pune Darbar where he is, venerated and called. So they had made peace between the Marathas and Shringeri. So, but in return, he also says, can you pray for my long life and my victory against my enemies? And actually, the Shankaracharya performs a Shatachandi, Havan, Sahasrachandi, Japa, and all of that for Tipu to win against the Marathas. So it is a little complicated there. And see the hypocrisy after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, since most of the grants from the temples were taken away because the state coffer was empty, all the Hindu temples, the grants to Brahmins, all of that was taken back because you had to raise money to release your sons. Now the hypocrisy is, on the one hand, you are defranchising the Hindu temples and the Brahmins. On the other hand, you're also asking them to pray for you, and they're doing it for their dakshina or whatever they got. And one small thing, which somebody in Melukote told me, the Brahmins and the Hindus are also smart, they know how to survive, so they told him, and he was so, the uncertainty had made him so scared and uncertain about himself that he would believe in all omens, superstitions, astrology, all divination mechanisms. And they told him, there are 3 types of idols that you should not, vandalize. Then your kingship is everlasting. And the 3 idols in Kannada, it meant Yedda Kallu, standing idol, Bidda Kallu, fallen supine idol, and Gund Kallu, of a round idol. Now that I think covers most of the kind of idols, but specifically, it was the Yedda Kallu was a Cheluvanarayana Swami in Melkote, which is a standing Vishnu. The Bidda Kallu, the lying thing, was a Ranganatha, in the supine, Ranganatha on the Adishesha. The Gund Kallu was a Nanjangood Sri Kanteshwara. So these three temples he never vandalized, because these people put those fears in his mind that if you do that, your kingdom will end.
Right. So on that note, Vikram, that's a good enticement for everybody to read. As I said, this, it's really a compendium on these two characters that are so live wire. I just want you to end with just last thoughts on this, Vikram. You said, and I agree with you, that it's important to write history without any particular skew on it so that, it can't be weaponized. But you also said something about intergenerational wounds, So just last thought, that as you say, write about Tipu Sultan or any of the others that are still live wire, how do we deal with the intergenerational wounds and the way that it is deployed in politics? Do you feel those things worrying you when you take on these historic projects?
No, certainly. I mean, I hate politics and I stay far away from those who practice it. But history has become a landmine and a live battlefield in politics, and everybody abuses it one way or the other. It's been done before, it is being done now, and it is going to continue to be done. And that's why what I said right at the beginning, I think it is the burden and the responsibility of historians to actually bring that sense of semblance, try to analyze why people did what they did, and put the facts on the table. In fact, as part of to foster new scholarship in Indian history, I've also established a foundation called the Foundation for Indian Historical and Cultural Research, FIHCR, where what we're trying to do is to go back to the primary sources. I think our view of Indian history is so skewed because most of our history is written in languages we don't understand or comprehend, whether it is Sanskrit, Prakrit, Pali, Sen Tamil, or Persian, Arabic. Our window to Indian history is only those 250 years of British rule and translations by Westerners or by our own people who either are unaware of the language or, maliciously they mistranslate. In Sanskrit, one word can have 10 meanings depending on the context. So you really need a scholar who understands that language so well. So as part of the FIHCR, one is we are also creating these multidisciplinary projects where a modern historian will, sit along with a Sanskrit Pandit, a Prakrit scholar, an archaeologist. Archaeologists and historians never talk to each other. And we've also instituted a Sir Jadunath Sarkar Fellowship for Indian History, where every year we are going to give them a substantial stipend of 15 lakhs, and the ask is at the end of it, you come out with a publish-worthy manuscript, which is meticulously researched, but it is also accessible. I think the only antidote to distorted history, if one could use that word, is more and more scholarship. It is not social media wars, it is not those outrages, it is, and let the politicians do what they do, what they are best at. I think at least it is the common people who should be armed with information. And as that adage goes, Jnanam Paramam Balam, knowledge is power supreme. Once you have the knowledge, you can't be taken for a ride by these politicians, at least. We can try.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to end with one thing which the book really gave me, and actually other young historian scholarship is giving me, particularly in the Deccan. Like I said, as we focus on Tipu and others, what emerges for me is that there was really no one clean narrative. It was always shifting, the allegiances were shifting, the Bijapur kingdom, even Krishnadeva Raya of the Vijayanagar kingdom that is positioned as the peak of Hindu kingdoms, actually was fighting the Orissa Raja, Hindu Raja, for the maximum part of his life and making alliances with Bijapur and Golconda and others. The last battle, yes, was against the Muslim kingdoms, but it's a constantly shifting landscape, and I would love to leave that thought so that we complicate history and don't get into the binaries that political leaders try to take us into. Your book is a big contribution to that, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Shoma. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.